Welcome to Promo Insiders, an ASI media podcast that covers the topics that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm CJ Mitica, and today, ASI Senior Executive Director of Research, Nick Kuzma, joins me for a deep dive into the Counselor State of the Industry report. From top products to hot markets to key metrics, we'll cover the most significant highlights from this year's study and outline the challenges and trends to watch out for in the year ahead. So, Nate, if someone's been maybe living under a rock for the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years and happens to work in the promo industry and doesn't know what the state of the industry report is, how would you describe it to them?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that it's the most comprehensive report that the promotional products industry puts out on an annual basis that covers all facets of the year that had just gone past, right? So we cover data that distributors of products and markets that they sold into and other key factors that we track over time for the year 2022. And then we also try to look at that data that is upcoming so that they can help plan their 2023 business and beyond. So it's really like a very, very comprehensive study of all distributors' business and suppliers' business for the 2022 and 2023 time periods.
Yep. So in today's podcast here, we're going to cover just some of the highlights, right? Some key data, some other things. If people want the full report, they should go online, stateoftheindustry.com, I believe, will take you right to this year's coverage. You can see all the infographics, all the data, and also it's obviously in print as well. Counselor Magazine, our summer issue, you can find it there too. All right, Nate, you ready to get this started?
Let's go.
All right. So first up, we're going to be talking about products and markets. This is very sought after data. We do this year after year, so we have amazing tracking data for it. Something the major, I think, takeaway here, the thing that stands out the most is the percentage of T-shirts sold. It's the number one product category again. In 2022, there were 17.1% of all promotional products sold were T-shirts, and that's the highest of any product, including T-shirts, that since we've been tracking the category in over a decade. So, why did T-shirts finish in record-breaking fashion last year?
Yeah, so I think what you've seen is that we've certainly seen over the last 10-ish years, right? The growth of apparel. That's really become much more prevalent in the promotional products industry in North America than it had been in the past. And I think you also had some, what I would consider to be extenuating circumstances, right? With other products over the last year and a half to 2 years. And what I'm referring to there is especially things like hard goods, right? Because you had some challenges. You had some supply chain issues with getting products in. You had port issues. And I think that the overall availability of T-shirts also helped sort of increase their overall market share. In addition to that, though, when we look at other research that we do, whether it's like our ad impression study, where we look at consumers' opinions towards promotional products and promotional apparel, we see that T-shirts are actually one of the most preferred types of promo products for individuals to receive. So I think it's a little bit of a multiple dynamics here, right? On one hand, it's the availability of them. Right? There was, even though there might have been some shortages of some colors, right, or some sizes, we definitely saw that, and we definitely heard that. They were still available. So you had that. So you had that dynamic, but then you also had consumers' appetites for things like promo T-shirts, and you had the growth of, or maybe not the growth might be a wrong word, the reemergence of the types of events where T-shirts are often given out. Think about sporting events, think about concerts, think about festivals, think about fairs. That's where T-shirts are very often giving out and sold and given away in very large numbers. So I think we've seen that as well.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, during the pandemic with the huge rise in kitting, but buyers and distributors were gravitating toward higher price point items. So if you're getting an apparel item, it might have been just something a little little quote unquote nicer or something a little more high end. So think about your jackets and fleeces. Maybe it was a hoodie. Not saying t-shirts weren't given away because they were still very popular, but to your point, just that event giveaway, like t-shirts
Mhm.
are always have always been the natural choice for that.
And I clearly forgot about trade shows, which have come back literal gangbusters. And that's another place where these things are given away, not just by the trade show organizer, right? But also they can be given away by the vendors and the suppliers that are exhibiting there. So yeah, it's really been like a multifaceted growth rate for them. And again, I think the availability of them really helped push them to the forefront.
So a couple other things just to note in these product category data. Drinkware finished second at 9.9%. I forget if that was a record, but it's I think it might have been. Like the category's been growing steadily year over year, and it's become a very significant presence in our industry. So why has drinkware become so omnipresent?
In innovation. I mean, if you want to know what my gut tells me, it's innovation. I mean, how many years ago was it where Yeti came onto the market, right? They were the hot thing, right? Then it was Hydro Flask came onto the market, these brand names. Then it was all of the industry companies that were putting out these very high end types of tumblers and water bottles. I don't know about you, CJ, but do you have a Stanley mug in your house? Because we certainly do. So, like, I think if you think about what drinkware was going back like 10 15 years ago, what were they? They were plastic water bottles, right? They were single walled aluminum. That's what they were, where you put ice in them and it literally started condensing, your hands literally froze off. I think I probably still have some of those. um to the point where it's become about innovation and sustainability of products. People care about sustainability, and we'll be talking about that, I think, probably throughout a little bit of this presentation. But people care about sustainability, and there's certainly a sustainable element to a reusable water bottle, in so much that they can be used for years and years on end, without ever uh, breaking, losing any of their durability, their effectiveness. So I think that that's really what it is. It's overall consumers' demand for them, and the fact that when you buy them and when you get them and when you receive them, you feel like you're doing something good for the environment.
Yeah, and drinkware has been huge. Something that's not huge anymore, PPE. So if you're looking for it in our rankings, you're not going to see that the actual letters PPE. I think it was last year that we grouped it back into the health and safety category. But consider 2 years ago, I think it was like 30% of products, something like that. In the data that we released this year, health and safety accounted for 3.3%. So that's
Yeah.
a huge drop, and I guess not surprising if you see just what's happening in society and distributors. If you're looking at your sales, no surprise that's how far PPE has fallen off.
Right, I mean, let's be honest there, but PPE and health and safety, right? That's really what
Yeah,
let's call it for what it was.
sure.
We always had pre-2020, right? 2019 and back throughout, the history of the study, we always had a health and safety category. And what is that? That's things like hand sanitizers. It's things like, lip balm. It's like first aid kits, things like that, right? So those were always in here, and they've always been part of this industry, and I think they'll always continue to be. But what happened, for everybody who's not aware of it, the industry, I think, in many cases was, if not highly aided, almost saved for a lot of companies, businesses, by PPE in 2020. When
Definitely.
as you said, it made up over a quarter of overall industry sales, right? It was like some $5 billion in industry sales that PPE accounted for. So obviously, with even with an upsurgence of COVID that you're seeing right now, there's no not now there's not you're not going to have that large push into PPE. I'm going to say ever again. Ever is a long time, but certainly for the near future, because what the industry was able to do back in 2020 was fill a very distinct void in society in some cases, because we were providing products that other people didn't have and they couldn't get. Right. I do think that now what you have now is society and a lot of other, whether it's government or manufacturers, hopefully, right? Hopefully, very, very rose-colored glasses here, are going to be more prepared on how to deal with this if something like this were to happen again. But yeah, it's back to, I think, what I would consider to be much more of a normal place in the promotional products landscape.
All right, so we're going to move on to our markets data. And I should actually, at this point, I should offer a word of caution for our listeners and viewers. Get comfortable because there is a bunch of data to go through. So this is not our typical 10 to 15-minute podcast. I think there's a lot of information here. And just as with the SOI package and articles where you really need to take time to go into it, we wanted to offer a good comprehensive view. So just be prepared to have some good listening ahead of you. Let's look at the markets here. Education and healthcare finished 1-2 again. Education was 13.1% of the of total market share in promotional products sold. Healthcare was second, 10.4%. Nate, just looking at the data for the markets, what jumps out at you?
Yeah, so really before we start about what jumps out, let's just talk about the overall structure of it, right? Because there are certainly things that jump out here when you look at trends over time. Education has been the #1 market for promotional products industry for every year, I think, since 2014, with the exception of 2020 when healthcare edged it out. So to have education back in a #1 spot isn't all that surprising to me. That makes some sense for sure. But really, what I would say is surprising to me is one that you have had the sort of, how to put it, a reduction, I guess you could say, in the tech industry, right? The tech market. Now, the tech industry in 2022 was rocked by a lot of major, companies that were laying off people, by significant cost cutting, by downgrades in stock and credit. So they were less likely to, I guess you could say they were less likely to put money into promotional products than they had been sort of like in the halcyon days of like the late teens, right? So that was one thing that we have definitely seen. Other things we've seen, other smaller industries, like, government was jumped up during COVID because they were buying a lot of promotional products, whether it was signs, whether it was stickers, whether it was magnets, whether it was PPE, right? So that's kind of come down. Healthcare is one of these like weird things. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens with healthcare in the near future, because they have been on sort of, except for that blip, a big blip, right? In 2020, they've been on sort of a multi-year softening, I guess you could say. So as that continues, and we have the emergences of other industries here, whether it's the nonprofit industry, which has been growing, whether it's the construction industry, which has been very, very strong within the promotional product space. And even when you maybe you'll start seeing, again, more significant rebound in things like hospitality, because that took a gigantic hit during COVID, and that's been building back up. And I'm going to be curious to see if in the future how those continue to grow.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind, again, for our viewers and our listeners, we talk about changes in these markets in terms of the data year to year, but it's really just a percentage point or two. So we're not seeing radical shifts, but within that, that's still, we're talking about, first of all, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes that shift when these do shift by just a percentage point.
Yeah.
So there is real shift involved. And even though we talked about, the technology industry had its struggles in the past year because they did layoffs, and that does have an effect on their buying capability. There are still opportunities in all these markets, and it's just about being sort of smarter in terms of finding markets that are more willing buyers at the moment. But if you are specialized in a market that's had a troubling year, or maybe a year or two slight decline, look at that and say, how can I do things differently? Who can I target within that market that is going to be a buyer? Maybe it's not your normal client, but maybe it's somebody else.
Yeah, CJ, to that point, a good rule of thumb here, because the industry was just over $25 billion in 2022. So every percentage point is roughly worth about $250 million. Yeah. So when we're talking about a decline or a slight softening in healthcare, you're still talking about a healthcare industry that accounted for over $2.5 billion in sales in 2022. So it's softening. It's still really, really big though.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one more thing that we want to highlight with the market data is, so we broke it down in terms of the top 5 markets for small distributors, that's 250,000 and under in revenue, medium-sized distributors, that's 250 to 1 million in revenue, and then large distributors, 1 million and over. So it's interesting, again, education and healthcare are tops for each of those revenue classes. So, and maybe that's not a surprise. When you get further down, you can see some differences. So like associations and clubs, that's often a very sort of local notion, and so
Yeah,
smaller distributors are there to fill that need. You look at the large distributors, finance and insurance, that's becoming increasingly consolidated. So maybe not much your local bank anymore, but these larger conglomerates, like large distributors, are there for them. And retail is a very dominant presence within large distributors, because these retail companies, have needs that span states, even countries, and large
yeah.
distributors are equipped to meet those needs.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move on to some other things. So we talked about product and market data. Let's talk about some key KPIs here, and I think you're going to see, just in general, that from where we were in 2020 to where we are now, you see like the bottoming out and then the march back, the rebound. And a lot of these metrics are going to demonstrate sort of how distributors have clawed their way back to if not to exactly where they were in 2019, to close to where they were. So this is just one example. If you look at profit margin for distributors, they had a gross profit margin of 36% in 2022. So that's the second consecutive year it increased.
Yep.
And it nearly matches where things were in 2018 and 2019, where it was about 36.5. So why here with margins, and maybe in general, why have distributors been able to get back to close to where they were previously?
Well, one, they haven't been afraid to raise prices, which is great, by the way. I mean, that's the thing. So prices have gone up, and prices, in 2023 are also, even though inflation has slowed, right, they're still going up. But one of the great things that I think I've seen here is, when I started at ASI back in 2014, I came into this industry from completely outside of it. And I would be talking to our members at our shows and at focus groups that I would conduct. And they were constantly telling me that, items such as, like, let's use writing instruments for an example, right? If they had quoted 13 cents on a pen the year before, they couldn't think of raising that pen by a penny, because they would lose that business. And I think what you saw was that, because there was an inflationary environment and prices on everything were going up, distributors actually followed suit, and they were able to say, I'm going to raise my prices. So if suppliers are raising their prices to me, I'm going to raise my prices to my client. And that sort of held true, and that makes businesses healthier. It makes them more transparent. It makes them able to more successfully navigate, some more challenging times. What happened in 2020? It was still a 33% profit margin is not unhealthy. It's always operated within a pretty tight band of like 32 to 37%, right? But the reason that went down was because, in many cases, a lot of the products that distributors might have been selling were unimprinted, right? You had a large percentage of PPE products that were being sold unimprinted, or especially in the beginning, right? As we moved on to the second half of 2022, you actually saw much more of a branding aspect going into the PPE market. But I think that that's one of the things, that they were selling them at a slightly smaller profit margin. I think that I would be surprised if you don't continue to see this number edge up close to where we were in 2019, moving forward into 2023. But I think that really what it is there's been an overall greater acceptance or willingness to raise prices. And I think that's really what I've seen.
Yeah, and so actually, I think pricing ties into one of the next stats we're going to show. So I'm actually going to show two. So the first one is quickly here, median numbers of orders. That either held really or went up for most revenue classes. There's a slight dip for medium-sized distributors. But I want to move on to to average order size. And by the way, this presentation is available for anybody who wants to see it. You can email us, which we're going to show at the end of our talk here, and we'd be happy to share it with you if you want to look at any of these numbers more in detail. And of course, they're also available as well at stateoftheindustry.com. So average order size. So it went up for everybody from last year 2021, I should say, to 2022. What does pricing have to do with the increase in order size?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things. Let's say your client, let's talk about inflation, right? 2022, inflation was probably around 10, 11%, I believe, right? So what you kind of seen is that if you sold the same basic product mix in 22 as you had in 21, your sales would have gone up about 10%. And as you mentioned, CJ, there's also been a bit of a movement towards more higher end promotional products. And so a higher end product might be 15, 20% more as well. So what you see is you've seen sort of a multifaceted reasonings for why overall sales order size has been increasing. And it's been sort of across the board. It's interesting when we went over it very quickly, but when we looked at median number of orders, right? Medium distributors, those between $250,000 and $1 million, 250,000 to just under $1 million, they actually saw they were pretty flat in terms of the average number of orders that they were doing from year to year. Yep. But they had the largest increase in average order size. So, there's a lot of things that are going in with that. Maybe they didn't quite serve as many customers, but the customers that were ordering from them were really putting a lot more money. $1,180 to $1,478, that's a lot more than a 10% increase. You had a 25, 28%, I think, increase in overall order size. So that's a really, really big increase that we've seen. So I would say that that's really what it is. It's companies accepting that prices have gone up and also looking at different types of products than they may have in the past, whether it was, as I said, brand names, higher end items, or even with products that might have a more sustainable aspect to them.
Yeah, a little bit later, we're also going to talk about on the supplier end what's going on with their margins and pricing. But it basically feeds into this where suppliers raise their prices and distributors are willing then to pass those costs along to customers, and customers understand because they're paying more for everything these days. They're not going to bat an eye when that pen goes up by a couple cents.
And any distributor who's been in this industry for more than 5 years will tell you that was not always the case.
I know. Yeah, things have changed in a lot of ways, and so look, you can argue that this is almost a positive change where distributors feel comfortable charging for their services and they don't feel like they have to be the low cost provider all the time.
Agreed.
All right, so one more thing we want to talk about with KPIs, and this is referring to sources of new business. So actually, I think it was what, 5 years or 4 years, Nate, since we last asked this question.
Yeah.
And we were just curious, how have things changed? What's different? No surprise, referrals far and away number one source of new business. Barely changed in the previous 4 years, and that makes a lot of anecdotal sense. When we talk to distributors, they love referrals, right? You don't have to do the work. Your customer does the work for you. Very interesting that some of these other metrics, dropped in the years since. So social networking that dropped from 31% to 25% as a source of new business. Cold calls, 26% of distributors listed it as one of their top sources of new business, went down to 15%. And email campaigns dropped as well. So I think that's kind of surprising, especially things like email mate and social networking, which people assume is just like the hot new thing, like they have to be on there to get business. Why would those drop in these past 4 or 5 years?
Is social networking the hot new thing anymore? I don't know.
Well, yeah.
The thing is, CJ, if you were to go back in time, the social networking, the social networks, I guess you could say, they even from 2018, now you have all of these, you have new ones that seem to come out all the time, and distributors are being told you have to be on this one and this one and this one and this one. So I think what you're kind of seeing is almost like an overload a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Do you have to be on Twitter? Do you have to be on LinkedIn? Do you have to be on Facebook? Do you have to be on Instagram? Do you have to be on TikTok? Maybe not, right? And I think that what you actually see is that distributors are saying, maybe I don't need to be on all of these. Maybe I haven't seen necessarily the ROI that I'm getting from them. And also, one thing that I've also seen is that distributors are incredibly busy. And there's if the belief is out there that social networking is easy and it's quick and it's free and it takes no time, none of that is true. It takes a lot of time to do it. Whereas referrals, you can ask for referrals and people will direct you to them. It doesn't take as much time. So I think what you have is, and this is going to sound kind of weird given the industry that we're in. I don't know how good all of distributors are often at marketing their own businesses, right? Because if you're a small company with a small number of employees, you only have so much bandwidth. So I think that sometimes when you talk about the challenges it takes now with sometimes getting orders placed, there's not as much time going on. And some of these things that we're talking about here, sort of the social networking and the email campaigns and the cold calls, especially, right? All of those take time to do. And if you don't have the time to to work on sort of expanding your business, those would be some of the things that would be cut first. We added in this year search engine advertising. We didn't
Right.
ask about that in 2018. I'm not quite sure. I was looking back at that. I couldn't quite understand why, but we didn't. But that's something, again, that you can set up once and only have to go back to it once every couple of weeks or once every couple of months, even if it's working well for you. So like that's sort of an example of something where, I don't want to use the, Ron Popeil set it and forget it type thing, right? But I just did. But that's kind of what it is. You can put it out there, and if it can monitor your ad budget, and you can certainly assign an ROI to it. And that I think is where a good amount of maybe timing and from where new business is coming from, that it can be attributed to that.
Yeah, I don't want to be a broken record. We've said this a lot. Like you want to be where your customers are, and that especially applies to social networks. There's no reason to be on everything if your customers aren't in all those different
Right.
platforms. There's 10,000 new Twitter imitators coming out. So if your customers aren't on Mastodon or Blue Sky or whatever else has come out in the 5 seconds since I started talking about these
On what
things,
now?
yeah, exactly. There's no reason for you to be on there. So like really specialize, like do some targeted research, find where your customers are online, if it's certain social networks or if they live in their email, do they live in their email? And then really specialize and dig into those, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, and I think CJ also, just regarding the emails, like you've had with the email campaigns, there has been such a proliferation of the amount of emails that everybody gets every day that hate to say it's like moved way beyond even white noise, right? Into just
Right.
like automatic, delete it.
I know, I do that with your emails too.
That's why you don't answer my surveys, I know.
So let's move on here. So we covered the KPIs. We want to talk about some of the business challenges that we covered in the survey. And again, so we do this demographically, right? For different size distributors, and we've done it for suppliers as well. But we asked distributors, what are your top 3 business challenges? And I think it's very telling, Nate. Like if you just take, their number one top challenge
Mhm.
for small distributors, increasing the size of their customer base. Medium and large distributors, recruiting and retaining well-qualified employees. I think it's pretty clear, like your priorities are different based on the size that you are.
I think your priorities are dictated by what you need for growth and survival, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, smaller distributors are the ones again, they're the ones who might be doing this, might be entering into the industry, right? They might be doing it part-time initially till they get up their business up to a specific size. There's a whole bunch of different reasons they could be under 250,000. They may be even significantly smaller than that. When for every distributor that has 200,000, you probably have multiples that are at 50,000. The industry really is one of these where there is an ability for somebody to come in and start small and then continue to grow. So it's not surprising that that's where they are. And I don't want to make it seem like, increasing the size of their customer base isn't important for the medium and large ones.
It is.
It is, and it's in the top three for both of them. But for them, there have been such challenges over the last couple of years. And I think they're even still continuing now. It might be not quite as acute, but it's still there now with with personnel issues. When we were talking earlier about just a few minutes ago about the sources of new business, right? A lot of those things take time. Well, if you don't have somebody that's managing your bookkeeping, if you don't have somebody that can come in and manage the administrative functions of your business and following up on orders and ensuring that everything is sort of flowing as it's needed to be, that's what you're doing. So you might need people, and if you can't find people to do that, now all of a sudden that starts to affect every other part of your business. So it's not, and especially for a larger distributor, they might have significantly more businesses that they're part of, where now it's like draining on everything.
Yeah.
They may be doing fulfillment, they may be doing marketing services and graphic design services, and now everybody's being pulled in different directions. So it's not surprising to me that those, once you get over a certain threshold, I guess you would say, that now you realize you need people and you need to keep good people, and that's been a challenge.
Yeah. So another big challenge, supply chain. We talked about it ad nauseum the past couple of years with good reason, but there's good news now, and you can look at it in the data. So extremely concerned about supply chain disruptions. So we asked both distributors and suppliers, and both of them had major drops in their level of concern. So distributors went from 72% being extremely concerned in 2022 to 40% in 2023. On the supplier side, 48% were concerned in 2022, 20% in 2023. Very encouraging. Why do you think, Nate, that there's been more optimism about the state of supply chain?
Possibly because it was horrific in 2021.
You can say that.
I mean, I'm not saying it's great. I mean, 40% of people being extremely concerned about anything is pretty significant, but it's still, it's not again, as, tragically obvious to everybody that things are, that you can't get products in. You can get products in. Even let's be honest, even at the height of the supply chain crises, there were still products available, but you might have not been able to be as selective as you had been used to being. And we're definitely still, kind of at that point where you have to, and your clients have to be a bit more flexible than they had been in the past. But this is very highly encouraging. If you look down at the box below it, where it says 74% lost an order in 2022 versus 78% in 2021, let's just be clear here. People are still, and probably today are still, losing orders because products are delayed, right? They can't get the product that they want, that they absolutely need, they can't get in time for an order, or it's just been totally discontinued. But we didn't really ask this, but let's just put a little bit of parens around the gravity of this. In 2021, people were probably losing multiples of orders due to supply chain issues. So it's not just a singular, it's still there. And my God, CJ, I don't know about you, I wish we had this question pre-2020 so that we could compare it. So we don't actually know what the benchmark is, but this is something where I'm going to be curious to see how it sort of transitions into the future.
Yeah, and the nice part about the State of the Industry report is that it puts hard numbers to the things that we're hearing. So anecdotally, we talk to distributors and suppliers all the time, and we hear things are better, things are improving, we're past the worst of it, and the numbers just give credence to that popular opinion. So that was great to see.
And it also kind of prevents the sky is falling mentality sometimes amongst us, right? Where if we hear from 5 or 6 people that, oh my God, everything's falling apart. Well, let's be clear, sometimes it is, right? But sometimes we're able to put a little bit of, we can sort of, couch what people are saying and say, okay, let's see if this is really a specific problem for a specific segment of people, or is it much more widespread? Because, either way, through the editorial team at ASI, we can sort of, we can sort of cover that in a way that best serves the industry. And I think that's what's most important with studies like this.
Yeah, and Speaking of a widespread problem, we asked distributors, how concerned are you about suppliers raising prices? 97% said they were concerned, and more than half, 53%, said they were extremely concerned. So that's a pretty broad number there, Nate.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that one. It is what it is. Like, it's not 100%, but it's pretty close, right? It's a concern, but again, I think if it was 10 years ago, this concern would literally keep people up at night much more than it might be now, because if you can justify why you have to raise prices, it's if you didn't raise prices already, you should probably consider doing it, because it is eating into your profit margin. And also, I hate to say this, but kind of everybody else is doing it, so
Yeah.
you should probably be doing it too.
Yeah, we should be clear. Like, yes, distributors say they're concerned. They're also concerned when they had no sales during the pandemic, and they still managed to pivot and and find their way, which included selling PPE. And I feel like as a group, I mean, distributors and suppliers have always been resilient, but especially in the last couple of years, I feel like they're much more equipped to navigate these challenges, just because it's been one after another, and then they're just used to sort of finding their way and finding a solution.
Yeah, and it's okay to be concerned about things. God knows everybody's concerned about something. Just matters on what year or day of the week it is.
I'm concerned about your fantasy roster, Nate, after our draft on
Thanks.
Tuesday.
Thanks, CJ. I appreciate it. Yeah, because they gave me the best grade, which means I am going to probably not win a game. Thank you.
We are recording this the day of the first NFL game, so we'll see how Nate's quarterback Patrick Mahomes and his tight end Travis Kelce do after the first week, and then we can come back, Nate, and have sort of a postmortem on your thing.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
No problem here. All right. So we talked about supply chain a little bit earlier, and we asked about this in another way: the percentage of on-time orders from suppliers. And if you just look at the tracking numbers, it's pretty dismal. It dropped for what, 4 years in a row. So I don't know. There's like a glass half full, half empty sort of view here. The glass half full is like, oh, like look, things didn't get worse. They actually improved from 83% to 84%. So that could be taken as a positive sign that look, like the worst of the supply chain issues are over, and we're starting to see improvement. Now that being said, 84% is 9 percentage points less than where it was in 2017. That's not a great number, Nate. So I mean, which way should our viewers and listeners take this?
I would take it as you need to stay on top of your orders. That's how I would take it. That's not going to be anything new to anybody, right? But you're looking at one in roughly every 6 orders. That is, I think that's right. 1 in every 6. Yeah, about 1 in every 6 orders that is being not delivered on time. And so I think you have to stay on top of your orders. But this is where I want to be very careful about this, CJ, right? I don't want to make this seem like this is only a supplier problem, right? This is a industry issue here that this is happening from. What happens, right? So what happens? Let's look at suppliers, right? Suppliers may be short-staffed, right? Especially if there's an outbreak of COVID, or people get sick, or people leave, or a new Amazon warehouse opens and they lose people because they're willing to pay more. So you have that issue there. There's a machinery breakdown. There could be like literally any myriad of things. But then look at a distributor, right? Look at the bigger distributors or the mid-sized distributors, right? They are worried about finding enough qualified people and retaining them. So what are they doing? Maybe they're not putting their POs in as fully as they had been in the past. Maybe they're not communicating as well. Maybe there's a couple of breakdowns in communication. I mean, we still have distributors in our industry that still fax orders in as opposed to doing anything electronically. And so all I'm saying is, I'm not going to cast all of the blame on suppliers. I'm going to cast a little bit of the blame on the way that the industry is sometimes. If I'm giving advice to distributors, I would say stay on top of your orders and make sure that everything that you submit, you are, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, and making sure that it is complete at first, the first time you do it, if you can. Because here's the thing. Let's think about communication. Let's say an order takes 5 email communications to get to the point where they've reached the production, right?
Yep.
How many days are you losing there? Because people aren't responding to email on an hourly basis. Like they're not like sitting by the computer waiting for it. So you might have 5-10 days that go back and forth before that order is actually approved. Whereas if the order might have been submitted, completed right at the beginning, it might be 2 days. So I think, whatever you can do to alleviate the burden that might be on suppliers is going to benefit you significantly. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, look, we could do a whole podcast just on this subject. It's a huge issue, and we wrote a whole article on it, in fact, last fall. If you go to Google and just search 5 ideas to improve promo, you'll be able to find it. So I think there are fundamental issues that need to be addressed in terms of the way that data is shared and companies integrate. But like as you said, like what can distributors and suppliers do? That they can take steps to help this problem be better about communication and stay on top of it. So it is still a major issue. And I think the data does indicate that. All right, we got one more here for this category, and actually I think this is a positive sign here. So 53% of distributors purchased from a greater number of suppliers in 2022 compared to 2021. So we were just talking about sort of the blame game that distributors were putting on suppliers. Yet, I mean, this is a great sign here that distributors are expanding their circle of who they're doing business with.
Yeah, necessarily, probably, right? I mean, especially if you think about, the supply chain issues that we had talked about, it's still pretty significant numbers that are seeing that there's a significant concern about supply chain. So you might be looking at the suppliers that you hadn't looked at in the past because the supplier that you're used to dealing with, maybe they don't have the products in stock, right? Maybe they're not being as responsive as they have been in the past. So I think it makes a lot of sense to diversify your supplier base. I think you've also seen though, because during COVID, what you actually saw was more of a contraction, right?
Yeah,
You had distributors really honing in on just those suppliers that they had done business with, because in order to sometimes get on board with new suppliers, there's steps that are involved. There's credit lines. It takes time to do it. But now what you're seeing is that growth again. I also think that the reemergence of industry trade shows has had an impact on this, because for the better part of a year and a half, roughly, right, from January of 20 through July of 21, and then there was not another one until January of 22. You didn't have many trade shows. It was hard for new suppliers to get a lot of visibility.
Yeah.
Within our industry. So I think what you have is sort of a hunger for new suppliers and the new energy and new products that they bring with them. I think that's also coming across here.
Yeah, that's a great point about the trade shows and getting the visibility. And like as you said, the trust factor is so critical. When the supply chain was at its worst, distributors, they were thinking like I had to find somebody I can absolutely trust, because every other order I tried, it just fell to pieces. So it's no surprise that they tightened their circle. So I think that's a healthy sign now that they're expanding that back out and doing business with more suppliers.
I agree.
So speaking of suppliers, we want to cover this in our last section. So yes, we ask a lot of questions about distributors. We also survey our suppliers and see how they're doing. And there's a number of interesting metrics. This one was very interesting. So gross profit margins for suppliers.
Yep.
It went up from 25.6% in 2020 to 31% in 2021. That's great. In 2022, it dropped back down to 28.8%. So like, why does that happen, Nate? Like business went up, everybody's happy, and yet suppliers' margins sunk last year.
Sure. 2020 profit margins on PPE that suppliers were selling were lower. That's what it was. That's really what it is. PPE it was such a large percentage of this industry that had an overall impact on overall profit margins. 2021, PPE became much, much less, and there was almost no blank PPE being sold by your industry in 2021. So we actually got back to selling purely promo products and promo health and safety products. So that increased again. 2022, what happened? Here's sort of like how to think about this, right? What is the average order time from beginning of an order to the delivery of the order in our industry? 6 weeks, 8 weeks? Obviously, it can be quicker, right? But
Mhm.
it can be it can be a couple, it can be, weeks or even 2 months of time. Think about how quickly in 2022 certain prices on things were being raised and
Yeah.
increasing. So what happened is suppliers might have quoted a product price at, X. And when they had to all of a sudden get that product in, it was X plus 10%, right? So what they were doing is they were eating some of the costs increases that they were being presented with. So, keep that in mind if, you're a distributor here. The suppliers that you're dealing with may be not passing on all of the increased costs that they were being served with in 2022. And that's really what I see as what I would say the primary driver. It's they were absorbing some of the cost increases because of just the way that our industry works and how they had to replenish their stocks.
Yeah, I mean, if suppliers passed along all the price pressures they were feeling, like distributors would know it would not be pretty. So they're definitely
Agreed.
eating to some of their costs, and they're under tremendous pressure from material costs, labor costs were an issue. They had to pay their workers much more just to keep them in a very tight labor
I think
market.
we
So,
saw it was in like the high teens percent that they had to raise wages for new employees and even existing employees in the last year. So it was a really significant increase that they had to also absorb.
yeah, and look, you distributors might want to say, well, look, if I don't care about suppliers like having bad margins, if it saves me some money, that's not a healthy foundation for the industry. You want suppliers who are healthy and doing well. So look, suppliers need to pass along some of those cost increases to distributors for them to run a thriving business, and distributors, you have to do the same thing. You need to pass along those price increases to your customers to run a healthy and thriving business. It just helps everybody all
I
around.
agree.
So we asked our suppliers different questions, and just as with the distributors, we grouped them in by different revenue classes, and the numbers are a little different in terms of what those revenue classes constitute for suppliers. So small suppliers we classify as 1 million and under, medium sized 1 million to 5 million, large suppliers 5 million and over. Very interesting, sort of the way you see different metrics scale up or down based on size. Sales increases. Large suppliers definitely increased sales the most. It was 3/4 of large suppliers compared to half of small suppliers. Turnaround time too. Large suppliers are much more faster in their turnaround time by the average of a few days. And we talked about supply chain disruption earlier. Only 7% of large suppliers were extremely concerned about supply chain disruption compared to nearly 3 in 10 small suppliers. So, I like these numbers, Nate, because you can tell there's some very key differences in the way that large suppliers are built and how they handle some of these challenges
Yeah.
versus small and medium suppliers.
Yeah, there definitely is. And but when you look at the large suppliers, I mean, that average say turnaround time, that's a big difference. That's a whole week turnaround time difference in for an average order. I mean, I think we have a statistic that's also where we look at how many orders require a 5-day turnaround time from the time that it's sort of placed. And large suppliers, they process about 40-some% of their orders in 5 days or less.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's sort of how they're built. So, in some cases they may have lower prices, but in some cases the large suppliers may have higher prices because they have all of these protocols and staffing and resources built into their price so that they can turn things around at a much much quicker rate. For the smaller suppliers, like look at them, they may not have as much inventory. They may not have as much warehouse space that the larger suppliers may have. So they're faced with different challenges. But what I would say is be cognizant of this when you look at the suppliers that you're dealing with and realizing that if you're dealing with, one of the top 40 suppliers or top 20 suppliers in our industry, they're going to be able to do things in a different way than the smaller ones. The smaller ones might be able to offer you, different positive things as well, but just be cognizant of that because they're it's sort of like I'm not going to demand the same level of service from Amazon as I am from a local business, but I'm going to get something good from each one of them, right? They each have their own differentiators. So just keep that in mind when you're working with them and really try to target what business you want to give to each based on what your needs are.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Nate, because as a distributor, you can own that narrative and make that pitch to clients. You'd be like, look, if you want something quick and fast, we've got people for that. But if you want something that takes a little longer, maybe has a unique differentiator where it's local, maybe it's maybe there's some sort of women or minority owned aspect to it too. You have vendors who do that too, and then you can put it on your client to be like, well, what's your time and budget, and then we can whatever that is, we can work within that.
I agree. Yep.
We got one more stat. We're just about at the end here. This was actually fascinating. I'm glad we asked this question, Nate, because we've heard a lot of sniping back and forth, suppliers and distributors. We just asked them. We asked both sides. How do you feel the communication is between your company and whether for suppliers with your distributor clients or with distributors, the communication between your company and your suppliers? And there's, I'd say, pretty universal sentiment here. Suppliers felt that about 78% agreed that the communication was strong with their distributor clients. 73% of distributors felt that the communication between their company and suppliers was strong. That's a much rosier picture than I anticipated, given all we've heard about the difficulties in communication.
Yeah, you ain't kidding, right? This is why we do the surveys. This is why we ask the questions, because you often hear, oh, well, this didn't go right, or this didn't go right, or they got my order wrong, or they're not submitting things right, and you hear about all of it, and you hear about them. And when I talk to our distributor members or our supplier members, I hear about them. But when you actually ask a really large sampling of our membership base and of the promotional products industry, when you go up to thousands of them and you ask them this question, what you find out is maybe it's not as bad as you think, right? Maybe it's not as bad because, again, when you operate and you talk to a lot of people individually, you can get a very specific view. But it's important to do it, because then what this shows me is, can you imagine if we went out there and we wrote a lot of articles about how god awful communication is, nobody's working well together and all this, and then we do a stat that said, nah, it's about 3/4 think it's strong. That's why you want to do it. It's not to say that there's not problems and that there's not things that can be improved, even amongst that segment, but also realize that it is possible that it can be strong. So if you're having almost what seems to be, if you're a distributor or a supplier and you're having what seems to be almost universal problems with your communication, look at your business processes a little bit. Look at, actually, think if there's something that you can be doing better to help other people out. And maybe there is for some, and maybe there isn't for others, right? But I would say just take a look at that, because it's not it's not a black and white problem by any means.
Maybe I'll get in trouble for this analogy, but like, do I complain about my wife and kids occasionally? Yes. Am I looking to get a divorce or run away and live in isolation? No. But I'm happy, and I love them, and they do amazing things. So yes, it's easy to complain about how things could be better from time to time, but just as the case with distributors and suppliers, the relationship is strong, it works, and yes, I'm not saying don't explore ways to improve things. There's always room for improvement, but the foundation that the industry is built on is strong.
Yep, completely agree.
So finally, we made it to the end, Nate. This marathon here. If you have questions, feel free to email us. You can see our information here, especially for our video watchers. My email address, cmitica@asicentral.com. Nate Kuzma is nkuzma, NKUCSMA @asicentral.com. We're happy to answer any questions, send you the presentation, whatever you need. Nate, just in terms of wrap up, what do you want people to take away as far as just a final thought?
When take some time to go to stateoftheindustry.com. It'll redirect you to the page. Read through the articles. Don't rush through them. Don't skim through them. It's going to take a little bit of time to do it, but I guarantee you, when you do it, after you do it, you will feel and you will have a greater understanding of the landscape of the promotional products industry. And I would also state this: in looking at the data, in looking at the stats, if there's anything you see that you have questions on or that you'd like clarification on, or that sparks some interest, like saying, hey, I wonder if ASI has this, we may or we may not, but we can always try to get it for you. And that's part of something that, we provide. There's not an extra cost involved with that. That's what, that's my job at ASI. My job at ASI is to help ASI succeed, and it's to help our customers succeed. And that's sort of my goal. So never hesitate to reach directly out to me.
All right. Well, Nate, thank you again for putting together the report and taking the time today to share your insights with us.
My pleasure, Siege.
All right. Thank you, everybody who's listening and watching. Have a great rest of your week.